You're listening to the Sanditon Chronicles, where we talk all things Sanditon and Sanditon adjacent. Come along with us as we dissect all of your favorite characters, scenes, and dialogue. We have so much to tell you. Hey guys, welcome back to the Sanditon Chronicles. I'm Maureen.
I'm Janice.
And we are back. Now, I know that the last podcast you probably heard me say it, and next week we'll be back. And then it took us 2 weeks. So sorry about that. That is my fault. I'm working on adjusting to my cancer meds, and it's been a struggle. And last week was our Thanksgiving holiday. So I wasn't even home at all last weekend. We couldn't make it work. I don't know if you guys know this, but Janice and I don't live in the same state. So we it's not like we can go meet up for coffee and record. She lives on the coast and I live very Midwestern. So we can't just meet up like that. So sorry about the
two time
delay.
Zones.
Yes. So that's right. Yeah, there are 2 different time zones too. I sometimes forget about that when we schedule our stuff. But 2 weeks, we're back. We are talking Jane Austen's novels in comparison to Sanditon. We're talking more parallels, more coincidences, more things that are alike, that sort of thing. And Jane Austen has 7 novels. For those of you who are just know her from Sanditon, you've got to read her other stuff. Now, admittedly, I have read I have read Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility, and Emma significantly more than the others. And the others, I think I've maybe only read once through. Don't come at me, but I've only read them once. And there is also Persuasion, Northanger Abbey, and Mansfield Park. Those are the other 3. So what we're doing is we're talking about ways that we can see these novels in Sanditon. We're going to talk season 1 and season 2, if there's anything we can think of in season 1. So I'll start. We're going to start with my favorite because it's my favorite. And I'm sure all of you listening know which one I'm going to say. And it's Pride and Prejudice, which is by far and wide the most popular of all of her novels. Even if that's not your favorite, gotta admit, Pride and Prejudice is the most popular of Jane Austen's novels. It's numerous adaptations, what is the word I'm thinking of? Adaptations. Yes, that's the word I'm thinking of.
Yep. Yeah, you said it. Adaptations. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it is definitely the most favorite. And it was the one that made her the most money.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's ruined all men for a lot of Jane Austen fans. We all look for, in my wedding vows, I was actually going to put something about Darcy, and my husband begged me not to. Like, okay, I'll take it out. So I honored my husband's wish, and I didn't talk about Mr. Darcy in my wedding vows. But I can see Darcy specifically, Darcy and Elizabeth, in Charlotte and Sydney, in Charlotte and Colburn. And obviously I think that's intentional because that's the typical trope that Jane Austen writes in. I just see it more as Darcy because he's my favorite male character that Jane Austen has written. But I'm sure that it's kind of like a little bit of Edward Ferrars in there, I think, with her and Colburn specifically.
Right.
So that you do have those aspects, but it's where, and I think Jane Austen she may not have been the originator, but she's, I think, the most prominent one to make the trope of misconception, fight, understanding, but separate, and then coming together with love in the end. I don't think she's the originator of that, but I think she's made it what it is. And obviously we see that with Sydney, and we see that with Charlotte and Colburn. And that's why we were so upset that we didn't get a Sidlot, because we were looking for that the final coming back together. We thought that the Liza Sydney thing was just that first bump in the road that kept them apart for the time being, but they were coming back together. Right. And admittedly, that's what they hoped to do. But I think that's why I was so upset, because we were looking for that Mr. Darcy, Elizabeth Bennet storyline there.
Yes, I agree. I think that definitely was the case. And it's, I do think it's definitely more the Sydney than Colburn.
Yeah.
Because it sort of starts from the very beginning, much more so than with Colburn. And the relationships were totally different.
Yeah.
It was
for sure.
Tom's brother, and it was interesting. I was watching a video that was done by a woman who is a 5 generations great niece of Jane Austen's.
Ooh, how fascinating.
And yeah, it's on YouTube. I'll try and find the name of it for you. But it was really interesting, and talking about the different things that happened in her life. And she went to the different locations where Jane Austen lived and sort of told the story about what happened there. And she wrote Pride and Prejudice after she had sort of fallen in love with this guy, and he was taken away from her because his parents knew that he had to marry for money.
Mm-hmm.
And so many of the stories in that video that they, that happened in her life, you can see how it's played out in her novels.
Yeah.
For sure.
And,
yeah,
every writing class, because I'm a writer, and I think that every writing class I've ever had, whether it's high school or college, the two things they always said is good writers evoke sensation and write what you know. And that's what Jane Austen did really well with. She wrote what she knew. She wrote female characters who were strong, like Charlotte is strong. I don't know why I just got really teary-eyed all of a sudden. I'm not like emotional, but my eyes are watered real bad right now, and it's like hard to see. But Charlotte is strong. Elizabeth Bennet is strong. Marianne is strong-willed. And you see even, why am I blanking on the older sister's name in Sense and Sensibility? I want to call her Esther, but that's not right.
Yes.
Eleanor.
No, it isn't Esther. Eleanor. Yeah.
Jeez Louise. You know what? I can claim cancer, so I'm just going to do that this whole episode. Don't have it. I don't think
and
anymore,
I just
but
generally, I'm good, and I'm very good at forgetting names.
Sympathy. You're having sympathy pains, Janice. That's what it is. It's flowing through to you.
I can talk to people that I've known all my life and space out on their names.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, nothing else about them, just their name.
It's what it's like in youth group when I have new kids come in, like, hey, you.
Yeah.
But Eleanor's a strong character. Marianne's a strong character. Even Anne. What is her name?
Oh, in Persuasion?
Yes.
Yeah.
Anne Elliot. That's her name. Anne Elliot. She's a strong character. And, Jane Austen writes these really well because she is a strong character. She didn't get the love of her life, but I think that's what she does. What she's doing well is she writes what she knows, but she also writes what she wants. And I think there was a part of it that always longed for that love story that coming, especially since the guy, and I don't know how, I know Becoming Jane, that movie Becoming Jane with McAvoy.
Oh yeah.
And Anne Hathaway. There's too many Anne.
Yeah, Anne Hathaway. Mm-hmm.
Not all of that is fiction. Not all of that is factual, but they did take it from some of her letters that she wrote, and they did. So there is fact to it. It's just not completely factual, and you can kind of see that played out there where it was taken away from her by some other force, but she longed for it, and so that's why she. And even with Sanditon, I do think that. I don't think it would have gone to the extreme that it did in season 1, but I think it would have taken that arc that so that's why a lot of people were really upset. And I think that they're focused so much on the ending of season 1 rather than the whole way it played out, because it was a Jane Austen trope. It wasn't anything we've seen before because it's not her writing. It was her inspired, but they honored her in that way, I think. And she does it really, really well. And I think that even though we got 12 chapters from her for Sanditon, what she infused into those characters, I think the writers were able to give her life in the way that would honor what Jane would have done.
Yes. And it's interesting. I just reread those 12 chapters, and it was interesting, how the characters were in those 12 chapters, and then what the writers did for the series Sanditon. And there's some similarities and some, there's been character development. Of course, this was a first draft she wrote. Who knows how it would have ended up, when she finished writing it. But like, for instance, Georgiana is not very healthy in those 12 chapters, whereas that's not an issue of hers in the series. But I can see why they did it that way. They didn't want it to all be about invalids. And, I'm sure she would have gone back and rewritten some things as she finished the story. And she herself was not healthy at the time she was writing it. And so probably that colored how she developed some of the characters.
Absolutely. And, if you haven't listened to my interview with Paula Byrne, she is an expert on all things Jane Austen. She's got a couple of books out that we can put links to in the description of this podcast, so check those out. But go back and watch that interview, and she does talk a lot about that specifically, that Sanditon is a darker work for Jane Austen because of what she was going through in her life right there. Because again, she wrote what she knew. And what she knew at that time was sickness and pain. And so the whole of Sanditon itself is a darker theme than what she's ever written before. And that's the other reason people are upset is this is too dark for Jane Austen. No, it wasn't, because what she was writing was tending towards more dark. And the time period of writing, there was a new style that was coming out that she was kind of adapting to. And Paula talks about how she's sick, and so she's writing in this way. And I think that they did honor that, the darkness that she was writing in. They just changed a little bit of the storylines. And Jane Austen too, she would go back and she would edit her works based on what's happening around her. Because
Sure.
Pride and Prejudice was originally called First Impressions, right? And I think that it was large when she was writing it while she was feeling things, and then she would go back and change it when things changed. So that was how she wrote. And I think that I do think that it could have gone in this way. And I think that they did a really great job with season 2, even though it wasn't how they wanted it to go originally. I think they did a good job keeping with the Jane Austen theme.
Oh, yes. Yeah. And all the similar things that happened. And by having so many more characters and so many more storylines, they could bring in so much more of Jane Austen's stories. The sisters, which we didn't see it in the first season. Like, sisters are a big thing in a lot of her books.
Oh yeah.
And I think it's because she and her sister Cassie, I think was her sister's name,
Cassandra,
were such good friends. Yeah, right. They were so close,
and they lived together until the end.
Right, and especially after Cassandra's fiance died in the West Indies, and which is interesting. That may have been why so much was brought in about the West Indies.
Yeah, and
and it may have been what they leaned on in season 2 for what happened to Sydney.
Yeah.
That he got yellow fever in Antigua, which is part of the West Indies. So,
and remind me, since you just reread, I haven't read, I read Jane Austen's first 12 chapters. I read it a couple times, but it was back in season 1, before all my sickness and stuff. Remind me, did she write about Antigua? Did she say that's where Georgiana was from in the first 12 chapters?
I just think that she said she was from West Indies. I don't think I don't think she said that she was Antigua. They didn't get the original 12 chapters doesn't get much into her background. She's not even introduced as a character until really pages. With a name and everything until like the last couple of chapters.
And so she introduced that West Indies storyline too. And I think that that's great that they kept that. And Cassandra and Jane, they never, I don't think Cassandra ever had another proposal. Jane did have one proposal that she accepted after her lost love, but then the next day said, no, can't do this. So, I think it was the next day or next night.
It was the very next day. She just said, I can't marry, because she knew that then she'd have to be a wife and there'd be children and she couldn't concentrate on her writing.
Yeah.
One of the things they show in that video is the desk, that writing desk that her father gave her, which is really cool. Man. That they still have it. I don't know which, I'm sure it's in their estate, and I didn't pay attention to where it is currently housed, but they made the point that her father, he showed how much he respected and wanted to support her in her writing by giving her this writing desk that she then took all the places she moved.
Wow.
Yeah, it was because it was mobile. It was a folder. It folded.
Okay.
Anyway.
That makes sense. I was picturing her like taking like this big giant desk everywhere. I mean, they had that when they moved, I think, anyway, but like I've always had an affinity for London. Like I've always been obsessed with the English culture and with England itself and London specifically and with the royal family. Like I love that stuff. And part of the reason I love it so much is because of Jane Austen and William Shakespeare, is actually my first favorite author. And then Jane Austen. And so I got to go to London and I was so excited to like be in these places that are so rich with history. But I didn't get to go to any places where she was or even where Shakespeare was. I didn't get to go there. So someday it's like a dream trip to go and just see all the places where she sat. This is making me emotional thinking about it. All the places where she wrote, where she had these thoughts, where she had these dreams of these novels that changed the world. It changed lives
Right.
of people. Still is.
Yeah.
I know that might
Yeah.
seem like
And
too much, but it's not.
I was reflecting the other day. I actually watched just yesterday, I think it was. I watched Mr. Malcolm's List,
Mm-hmm. I haven't seen that.
the one that Tom Hanks, Theo James is in,
Oh,
where
okay.
it's another period piece,
Mm-hmm.
and it's um anyway, it was interesting because as I was watching it, I was just thinking about the fact that so this is a piece that is written about the Regency era, Jane Austen's era, basically, in which, it's a modern writer that wrote it. And I
Mm-hmm.
was thinking the thing that is so amazing is that when Jane Austen was writing in her own time about her own time and how much that has influenced movies and television as well as books all
Yeah.
these years later.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's astounding, really.
And the way she wrote about that time period, the way she wrote about the people and the customs and the even down to what they would everyday life, it was so romantic seems like a trite word, but it was such a beautiful escape. And I prefer reading stories from the Regency time period because of what Jane Austen did. And it's clear that a lot of other authors do as well, because so many
Right.
authors now are writing about that time period because they fell in love with it through the eyes of someone like Jane Austen who had written about it in such detail.
Right. Yeah. But she wasn't writing romantically about some
Mm-mm.
previous time. She
No.
was writing about real people in her
Mm-hmm.
time.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I find really interesting
Mm-hmm.
about it.
There's one movie that I watched, Austen Land. I don't know if you ever
Oh,
seen that
yeah.
movie with Keira Knightley, or not Keira Knightley. It's Carrie Russell. And
Uh-huh.
I love that movie. And it's this woman who is so obsessed. It's Pride and Prejudice specifically, but she becomes so obsessed with that time period because of what it encapsulates. Like, I don't like reading about today. I see today. It bores me. And you could tell that Jane Austen was not bored by her time period. There was always something that enticed her. There was always something that intrigued her. She would find the extraordinary in the ordinary, I think. At least that's how it came across in her writing, because what she wrote about was ordinary things, but extraordinary events.
Right. And she was very much uh, observant
Mm-hmm.
of everything in her society. Of course, the society now is so much less structured.
Mm-hmm.
That was part of the deal,
Yeah.
is it was such a structured society, and she was somebody who was trying to sort of break out of it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And so, yeah, it's interesting to think about.
And the women she wrote about, it was women who they should be rewarded for how different they are from the norm. And they were rewarded in her works rather than penalized for having an opinion or penalized for being vocal and wanting to go out on their own. Like, she wanted them to be rewarded in her books because that's who she was.
And it was the opposite of what really happened for her. For Pride
Mm-hmm.
and Prejudice was released, it was written by a lady. It
Mm-hmm.
didn't say to begin with who it was,
Yeah.
who wrote
It
it.
was like, it
And
was years later that came out that it was her, right?
I quite a while later, yeah. Although I think what happened was her, and a part of it was that the family didn't want, it to be known
Mm-hmm.
that it was her. But it kind of came out through one of her brothers. And
Mm-hmm.
so then after that, it was her name was on them. But I know the story is that somebody he knew had read it and was saying to her brother, well, that couldn't have been written by a woman because
Mm-hmm.
it's just too complex and, all this kind of stuff. And he's like, well, as a matter of fact, it was written by my sister, you know.
I love her
So
brothers. Like, I mean,
yeah,
what
yeah.
little I know of her brothers, I just like how much, and I know that she shuffled between her brothers near the end, her and Cassandra did, but I feel like there was a lot of love between them
There
from what I've
was,
read.
although one of the brothers, although there's a couple of situations, the whole reason that they left her family, the home where she'd grown up, where her father was a um,
Minister or Reverend.
minister. what do they call him? A vicar,
Mhm.
was because he wanted to retire and turn his position over to his son, one of his sons, and his son and daughter-in-law were taking over the house, and
Mhm.
she did not want to move, and they ended up, with her parents' permission, selling off a bunch of her belongings before she could get them out of the house.
Mm.
And she moved with her parents to Bath. And you can kind of see that in um, Persuasion,
Yep.
where she's there with her father. It's just, and her stepmother, I think it is in that story, isn't Anne there with her?
I think
Anyway,
so.
when they're in Bath, and and she doesn't have a very high opinion of that father.
Mm-mm.
And he's kind of a, anyway, goofball,
Yeah.
and for lack of a better word at the moment. And so it's interesting, when you hear about her life, and I'll find the name of that video, when you hear about her life, you can just see how so much is reflected. She actually
Yeah.
quit writing for a while when they were living in Bath,
Mhm.
for actually quite a few years,
Yep.
until she moved in with one of her brothers. But
Where
I
was the
think also,
where she started to write again was a name of the town that started with Steve or Shreve. Was it Shreveport or Steveport, something like that? That's where she started because
well, could
I don't
be, yeah.
I don't know if she took a
Yeah, I
vacation
think
there.
you're
She
right.
started
It was
living there, but that's when she started writing again.
Chatham Cottage. Is it Charlton Cottage? Her brother owned the
Mhm.
manor, and they put her and her sister up in another cottage that
Yeah.
was on the property, and that's when she started writing again.
Mhm.
Yeah, she had to get away from the busy city. That was a
Mhm.
lot of it.
Yeah, and there was just it wasn't what she longed for. It wasn't what because she
No,
loved where she grew up. She loved that surrounding. I mean, that was what she knew. And she was
yeah,
taken out of it. She was depressed about it.
yeah,
But you bring up Persuasion. Let's talk about a little bit of Persuasion, where we see Persuasion in Sanditon. And I'll just give you
yeah.
a quick sort of synopsis of Persuasion for those of you who have not seen it before. I pulled up some descriptions that we could just read to you guys. And for Persuasion, it's young Anne Elliot. She lets her dad talk her out of marrying the love of her life because he believes the heartbroken Frederick Wentworth to be their social inferior. He was in the Navy.
Actually, it wasn't so much him that talked her out of it. It was that friend of hers
Mhm.
that talks her out of it.
But the dad was very much behind that because she came from a
I'm sure.
family that had some sort of social standing, and he didn't. He was a lowly naval person, so
Right. He
he
wasn't
had
a
nothing.
captain or anything at that
No.
point. Yeah.
And they lived in this grand house where they would have balls and people, and it was the father's friend is what you're talking about, right? Who like kind of talked him into having her not marry him.
It was, yeah, there was a woman
Yeah, because it
friend.
was
Yeah.
her mom died, and it was like her mom's friend, I believe. Well, and again, this is one that I've read twice. I've read this book twice, but I believe it was the mom's friend started being a mother figure to the daughters of her dad, of Mr. Elliot. And she didn't think
Right.
that she was in a league with her dad, thinking that Wentworth was not worth her time because he wasn't of money, he wasn't of standing. And it turns out that 8 years later, their family is suddenly poor, they go broke, and they have nothing. But Wentworth has made something of himself. He's a naval captain who has money, and he could get her the things that they wanted for her in the first place.
Right. Right.
So that's what Persuasion is about. Now, I can see that sort of in almost like Charlotte being that for herself a little bit when she's like, I'm going to be a governess. And this is a stretch here. But when she decides she's going to be a governess over marrying for love, when she had someone who she could have fought for, although she didn't think it was right. I think that that's kind of where I see Persuasion maybe a little bit. And that's a stretch.
Where I see it
Hmm.
is in and not
Oh, yeah, another one.
not the main character in Persuasion, but her sister, the one who jumps off the steps that Lime
Oh, yeah.
into tries to jump into the captain's
Hmm.
arms, and then she hits her head, and
Yep.
anyway, So I see that at least partially in the character of Allison.
Yeah. Especially in that first
You know,
scene where
that-
they want to impress the soldiers and their carriage falls.
Yeah, yeah. And Jane Austen lived for a while in Lyme. And so that part of the story is definitely from her life.
Yeah.
But so I think that's where I see persuasion in Sanditon.
Yeah. I think
That
even
in
what?
I don't know. I was just thinking about it. Right. I was thinking about the conversation she had with Esther at the beginning of Sanditon, you know, and what she has to say about Sydney, how dangerous he is. And, you know, it just reminds me of the conversation you can imagine was had
Yeah.
before the story picks up in Persuasion.
Yeah. And I think it can be seen a little bit in who Lady Denham is. Only Lady Denham doesn't fall from grace. She continues to have her money, but in the way she coaches her niece and her nephew to marry for money, although she says it's because, you know, you need money, but still she coaches them to marry, pushes them, tries to force them into that. Maybe that a little bit too. But
yeah.
Sense and Sensibility is another one where I can kind of see it in there, right? With specifically with how Marianne Dashwood was with I want to call him Wentworth because we were just talking about persuasion, but it's Willoughby. How she's in love with Willoughby, and he's this sort of, now I don't think Willoughby is as bad as everyone thinks he is, because he had to marry for money. He did kind of screw over somebody, but he's a little bit lesser than Wickham in terms of the evil scale.
Yes. Yeah.
He's
definitely.
not as evil as Wickham was at all. But
because Wickham was just like he was intentionally trying to,
Yeah. And I mean, Willoughby did know that he had to marry for money. Willoughby did know that he was going to need to marry this other woman because his aunt was telling him, you have to do this. But he wanted Marianne. So he led her on because he wanted her. And that's where it stopped.
Right.
And I think you can kind of see Sense and Sensibility in Lady Denham a little bit. You think of certainly what we hear about Willoughby's aunt or aunt. I never know which way is like right to say that, but I always feel like since I've been watching these British shows, I feel like I say aunt wrong all the time now. So I like aunt, but where she's telling him, you need to marry for money. You can't, if you marry poorly, you get nothing from me. And I feel like that's kind of a Lady Denham thing, although we never see his aunt. But then there's also Edward Ferris's sister, who is, she has, what's his fiance's name? The young girl Edward is originally married to, but she marries his brother, Robert.
I don't remember.
I swear I've read these books. I swear. Cancer.
But
I got cancer.
Let's see.
But Edward's sister takes her sort of under her wing and says, anybody would be happy to have you. You know, you could marry above your station, kind of Lady Denham and Clara. She's taking her on to make her seem more respectable, more marriageable. And then when she finds out that she's engaged to Edward, sister loses her mind. And so does mom. And she kicks her out, banishes her. Of course, what Edward and Clara did was a little more than finding out they liked each other.
Yeah.
But Lady Denham banished them. Like, no, you're done.
Right.
Get out.
Right.
But there's the point I was going to bring up with Marianne and Willoughby and Colonel Brandon, who that started my love for Alan Rickman, was Colonel Brandon. Because I mean, what a great character that is. But I think that we can kind of see that with Sydney, or with what am I thinking here? I just completely lost my thought.
Well, I'll tell you who I think of.
Okay.
I think of Allison and her two suitors.
Yes.
You know, that's who I think of. The two captains. And
Carter was Willoughby and Fraser was Brandon.
Yep. That's exactly, different ages and all that.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
In terms of their character. Yeah.
And of course,
one was real, one was.
Yes. And we are drawing parallels, but we are not saying at all that the writers of Sanditon have copied Jane Austen. But I think that they wanted to put Jane Austen in all of this work. So they just were inspired by her to write these stories. And these are stories that we love. So I don't think they copied her other works, but I think that we can see the parallels in there. And I think they did that for the fans rather than because they couldn't come up with something. So we see that they are young. Fraser and Carter are more aligned in ages and even personality. I mean, Carter It's not that he went and married someone else for money. It's that he was just falling in love everywhere he went. And that's just kind of
he was in love with love, and she was a very
exactly.
pretty girl.
So it's
Yeah.
not the exact
Yes.
same storyline, but it does feel, it feels like there's a parallel there between them.
And I think they were really trying to honor Jane Austen's
Mhm.
memory and writing when they
Yeah.
wrote season 2 and 3,
Mhm.
and instead of just going off in any direction,
Absolutely. I agree with that completely. And I think
Yeah.
with Eleanor, I think that I don't think we've seen it full yet, but I think we will. Where, Eleanor has Edward. They start to fall in love, but then she finds out, of course, it's because he's engaged, and that's not the case in Sanditon. Well, kind of would have been if Sydney came back, but it's not. But she finds out there's a reason she can't be with Edward, and she becomes sad and kind of distraught and pulled back. But in the end of Sense and Sensibility, Edward comes back and he says, no, I fixed that problem. I'm free to be with you. And I think we're going to kind of see that storyline with Charlotte, because right now where we're at, there was something that kept her from being with Colburn, where she can't. And we see her at the end of season 2. She's crying and she says, enough now. And she's sad and she's lost another one. And she's heartbroken. And I think we're going to see that come around in the end of season 3. Well, I know we are, because that's how these writers are not cruel people, that we are going to see that Colburn is going to have removed what was stopping him. And he's going to be able to give himself to her as Edward did to Eleanor.
Right. Yeah. No, I think you're right. Although, yeah, it's a different situation. In fact, as a matter of fact, now Charlotte is the one engaged.
Yep.
And, how are they going to get out of that situation? I am very curious to see
I know, me too.
what they do with it. Yeah, it will be interesting. So is there anything you see in Sanditon from Emma? And I just rewatched Clueless.
I love Clueless. I think that's one of the reasons I loved Clueless so much, is because it's Emma trope. I think that's, and I didn't even realize it at first until I was like in high school I was in freshman in college, because high school, it came out when I was in high school. But I was like, oh, that is Emma. It is an Emma remake. I was very excited.
Well, I didn't realize it until either in your interview with Paula or in something she wrote, and I don't know which, when she brought it up and said she thought that Clueless was the best remake of Emma. I went, oh my gosh, it is Emma. I hadn't even thought about it,
I remember in college reading an article, and my mind was just blown.
Yeah. I mean, it was such a good remake. You didn't even realize it was a remake.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of what Jane Austen has done, is that people are finding ways to connect themselves to her, because she was so good at what she did. But before we move on to Emma, because I do have one for Emma, I want to just give you a quick synopsis of Sense and Sensibility. Sometimes I talk so fast that not all my letters come out of my mouth. So Sense and Sensibility. When the Dashwood sisters, Eleanor and Marianne, are faced with the impending poverty following the death of their father, Eleanor takes a logical approach to life when Marianne takes an emotional one. We see that they had to leave their house because Mrs. Ferris their brother is now coming in with his wife, and his wife wants them all out. And their brother's a huge, enormous pushover, and his wife is just kind of a terrible person. So they kick them out. So they have to find a place to live. And the result is that both women endure hardship, but eventually are rewarded with husbands. And I'm not going to give away what happens there, but there is lost love and then regained love. And then there is a lost love that turns into a new love, and that one is never regained. So there's a lot, I think there's a lot of going on in Sense and Sensibility, but it comes together so nicely and all fits so well. And the emotions of each person are written so well. So if you have not read that book, it's one of my favorites for sure. Go read that.
And one thing about Sense and Sensibility, the film that was made with Emma Thompson, and
it was Hugh Grant and Kate Winslet.
That is such. I saw this video about the making of it, and Emma Thompson was a big force behind it being made, and the director is a Japanese director.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
They convinced. Yeah, they thought he would be a really good director, and he had done a bunch of period stuff in Japan, but also just the Japanese culture was so much. He found it sensibility, Jane Austen's writing, specifically Sense and Sensibility, to be very similar to Japanese culture.
Oh,
In that, in terms of the restrictions, how things, it was more similar than modern society, to the Japanese culture. And yeah, his last name is Ing,
okay.
and it's just the most interesting um, video about how they made that film and how they persuaded him
Mm-hmm.
to take it on. And yeah, and I love it. I mean, I think it's so
Yes.
well done.
That's my favorite Sense and Sensibility.
Yeah,
I don't think I really
definitely.
gave any other, I think there's only one or two other ones of Sense and Sensibility. I never really gave any of the other ones a
Yeah,
chance though, because I love this one so much.
yeah. Oh yeah, it's such a difference.
And
So anyway,
as we get into like the parallel between Emma, I want to point out that though we are finding parallels because these writers did not steal Jane Austen's works and put them into a character. The way we know that is we can see, like, I can see several parallels between Allison and other characters from other books that she's written. And she's where I see Emma.
right,
So she's not totally Emma because she's looking for love herself, but in the way that she's pushing Charlotte and trying to get Charlotte to go fall in love with other people, the way that she's trying to say, you need this, you should do this, this is good for you. And she's kind of helping, encouraging Georgiana sort of thing. So I think I
right,
see Emma a little bit there, but I see also different characters in Allison's character. So these are not carbon copies of what Jane Austen has written. And I think that's a testament to the writers who wrote Sanditon, that they can put so much Jane Austen influence into this while making it their own, that each character can have influences from several of Jane Austen's characters
right,
and not be a carbon copy of any one of them. And I think that's a
right,
testament to
right.
good
Yeah,
writing.
absolutely. I agree with you. And also, in some ways, Georgiana takes on the Emma character because she's the one who's sort of
Mhm.
influencing
Yeah.
Allison about, oh, let's go get a hat, and then all the
Mhm.
things she does to go to visit the camp,
Yep.
and to take the carriage out, and those kinds of things.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's so I can see it in her as well,
Yeah.
which is interesting to think about. I hadn't
Mhm.
really thought about it until now.
Also
That
Arthur a little
Yeah.
bit,
Mm-hmm.
because
Yeah.
Arthur he's helping Georgiana with Lockhart, and he's, trying to push them together, but he's also helping Tom with what he's doing. And he's kind of seen as, oh, that's just Arthur. And I think, well, Emma
Yeah.
is the character of Emma. I think she's not seen as a joke, but I mean, there is a point in time in the story where her advice becomes, we don't want to hear from you anymore.
Right.
There
Right.
is a point where that happens. And I think that kind of happens with Arthur a little bit, where Tom is just like, no, I don't want what you're saying. I'm going to do this. But Arthur is constantly trying to bring things to other people's life and busying himself with other people so he doesn't focus on himself.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think you're right about that.
And again, it's not
But
a
that's
carbon
the
copy of Emma. It's just there's pieces of Emma there.
Yes. We don't see the her love relationship
Mm-mm,
in any of
I don't think
Sanditon, I
so.
don't think. But yeah, interesting.
Mm-mm. Yeah. And the synopsis for Emma is between taking care of her father and forcing her friends to date each other, whether they want to or not.
Right.
Emma is a socialite, Emma Woodhouse, and she doesn't have the time or inclination to get married until the end, which of course she suddenly does get married because she realizes that she loves this guy who is in love with her and has been trying to get her to marry him. So
Well,
that's,
he's been more like a brother to begin with, and
mm-hmm.
then,
But he fell in love with her.
she's yeah. And there is a really good older version of Emma, but um for modern audiences, Clueless is such a good remake of
Mm-hmm.
it.
Yeah. I think Clueless is my favorite. Like the Gwyneth Paltrow one is maybe a second, but
Uh-huh.
I think my issue with the older one is not even the story itself, but just the way it sounds, the sound quality. I don't like the sound quality of the
Oh,
one. So I think that's what, for
uh-huh.
me, I can't like watch it very much. But there's one that was before the Gwyneth Paltrow version that I actually like the storyline better and how they played that out.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah.
I
And
haven't
there's
seen the new Emma, but I've heard terrible things about it. So I'm scared to watch it.
I've seen it, and I didn't like it at all to begin with. I like where it ends up. but, and I like the character who plays, the guy she falls in love with. I can't think of his name.
I want to help you, but I haven't seen this one.
Well, who's Emma's love that she ends up with?
Oh my gosh, I don't even remember his
Do you
name.
remember? Anyway,
Paul
yeah.
Rudd.
In the movie, it's Paul Rudd, but who is it in the book? Here, maybe
I
I'll
honestly don't
find it.
remember.
But anyway, it's, yeah, and he's very logical and sensible.
Yep.
And is it Henry Knightley? Is that the character?
I think so. Yes, I think so. And
yeah,
Emma is the opposite of him.
It is.
You can kind of see that, not in its entirety, but just in the differences of personality with Sydney and Charlotte. Because Emma was very fantastical. She was very, I mean, not to the extremes of she wasn't in reality at all, but in how she wanted to see people and how she wanted to match them up. And just, she was happy with her life and everything was good. And then Henry was so logical and he was so precise about how he wanted things and how things should go. So I think that the parallel there for me is in season 1 with Charlotte, where she's very happy to be where she's at. She doesn't have any desire. She doesn't want to get married. She's not there to get married. She's just there to experience something good and grand. And she helps Tom and she's helping Georgiana. Yes. And she's looking for all this stuff. But then you see Sydney, he's very sour at first. He's very reserved. He's not a happy human being. And so I think that's a comparison we could see with the love story there. But again, not in its entirety. It's not a carbon copy of that love story. There's just elements of it, I think, are in there.
Well, you could say a similar thing about Colbert, too.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a difference in the relationship.
But I think at that point, Charlotte is not as happy-go-lucky in season 2. She's not as
no, she's been hurt.
Innocent. Yeah.
Right.
She's a little more jaded.
No, her character is very different from Emma in season 2.
Mm-hmm.
But Colburn's character has some similarity.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's dig into, do you see any of Northanger Abbey? I'll give you a little quick synopsis of Northanger Abbey. I see a couple, but it's the quirky and imaginative Catherine Morland must learn to navigate the many trials, triumphs, and pitfalls of English society. And also there's a minor subplot where she thinks her boyfriend's father may have murdered his wife.
I
Northanger Abbey.
This is not my favorite.
It's not mine either. Northanger Abbey, I've read once, just one single time ever. And I mean, I enjoyed it because I enjoy all of Jane Austen's things, but it wasn't my favorite writing of hers. I think there are better ones that I prefer to be immersed in. And I only saw one adaptation one time. I'm like, oh gosh, it feels like it's just dragging on forever. So I'm not as familiar with Northanger Abbey as I am with anything else. And I would in fact say that I'm least familiar with Northanger Abbey than I am with anything else. But I think where we can see that in the Catherine Morland character, we're trying to navigate the trials and triumphs and pitfalls of society. I think we can kind of see that in a way mixed between Charlotte and Georgiana. Because Georgiana is this Black heiress who's wealthy and she's coming to Sanditon. And I think of that scene in season 1 where she's like, hey, but I'm a heiress and I'm an heiress. Let me on the carriage. I have money. And
yeah.
No, we can't do that. And so she's trying to navigate this. Antigua is very different from English society, especially at that time.
Yeah.
So she's trying to navigate a new society. And they talk about the ball where she met Otis and how she was alone on the side of the room, unhappy and angry. And she thinks he's a servant. And so she treats him as such. So I think that there's kind of that aspect where she's trying to navigate this new society that she's been thrust into when she's not used to it. She doesn't know it. And maybe a little bit with Charlotte, where she's going from the country life where it's anything goes and she's accustomed to doing as she wants when she wants, because she's a small community. She has the trust of her family and the trust of the community, going into Sanditon where things baffle her. Sydney baffles her. His reaction baffles her. Edward and Esther, like that talk they had on the beach in season 1, Esther and Charlotte was baffled by that. Like, why are you talking about? Why are you saying this stuff?
Because she was used to people being more honest and straightforward and not having agendas, which I think is probably why in season 2, at the end of season 2, they had her engaged to the guy from her hometown.
Yep.
Because it was like, I'm kind of done with this. I'm going to something where I have comfort.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know that there is any characters that represent her love interest in
I don't think so.
Northanger, or
It
the
was a,
sister who sort of takes her under the wing.
I need to reread this because it's been I read it
Is
once.
it?
And
Yeah,
the
I don't
adaptation I
know.
saw was years ago. I
Yeah,
can't,
there
I can't
are
bring
two
myself to get into this one.
adaptations I've seen. One of them I didn't like at all.
Mhm.
And the other one was much better, but it was older too. So there was the cinematography wasn't quite as good. But I wondered about the whole uh Esther and um her brother, and
Good.
that situation. But I think it's stretching it a little bit
Yeah. I
to
mean,
make it be.
I think maybe more is where Charlotte jumps to a conclusion about Sydney's role with Otis would fit more with the misinformation Catherine has about her love interest's father. So again, it's not, she doesn't think Sydney murdered anybody, but she comes to this conclusion, insistent that it's right, that no, Sydney, Sydney is a slave owner. Sydney he's racist. And she comes to that conclusion and she treats him as such, and has to be, over time, learns the reality of the situation.
Right.
But
Yeah.
I don't know that I can talk any more about Northanger Abbey because I'm so unfamiliar with that one. So unfamiliar with it.
Yeah, I think that I don't think there's that much similarity, and I don't
No.
think it's one of her better works anyway. So
No. And I don't know that, like, I try to imagine which one she loved more, and I can tell, like, the way I judge it is the ones that I feel like the characters are more developed, the storyline is more full and well-rounded, and you just get more joy out of reading it. I think those are the ones that she wrote when she was satisfied with them, and she like loved this story. And I don't see that in Northanger Abbey. I don't see, it's not as smooth as the other ones are. And I'm calling Pride and Prejudice smooth, and that's not to say there aren't bumps in the road for the characters. There are many for all of the characters, but the writing is so seamless as it goes from one plot to another point to another point. And I think in Northanger Abbey, for me, it just feels like it stops and goes and stops and goes. But that's why
yeah, I agree. So should we talk about Mansfield Park?
Yes. And the one obvious parallel I want to talk about, it's not really a parallel, but if you look in season 2, you see one that says Mansfield. I don't know if it says Mansfield Park, but it says Mansfield something. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
Hey, they just put her novel right on a sign there. And I was excited about it.
Right.
I wish I remembered what it said, but it doesn't. I don't know that it says Mansfield Park. It might say Mansfield something, but it might say Mansfield Park. Tell me in the comments. Did you see that, Janice, what it said? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I think it did say Mansfield Park, but it was
Maybe
like this low sign, almost like yeah, I can't remember exactly either, but there was definitely a reference to Mansfield Park.
And where it happens, if I'm remembering correctly, it's when Arthur is talking to, I want to say Tom, Mary, and Charlotte, but he's talking about how much better he feels without Diana. And they stop on that boardwalk there, and then just behind their heads, my hand is getting real close to the camera, just behind their heads, you see it on a building. And so watch it. It's in like the first episode, I believe. It's in the first episode. So
I think you're right. Yeah.
That's a
Early
very
on.
clear drawback to Jane Austen's novel. But Mansfield Park, that's one where the adaptation, because I actually enjoyed reading Mansfield Park. I've only read it a couple times, but when I don't feel like reading, I'll watch an adaptation of it. And I always forget that there is a scene I don't want to see and a scene that I don't want my kids to see in the newest Mansfield Park adaptation, the one from the 90s, where it's got, I don't remember her name, but I'm like, oh yeah, like I like my kids to watch Jane Austen stuff with me because I can't get them to read. I actually bought them. If you look at Pride and Prejudice, you can buy the book for different stages of life. So I have one that's for babies, and then I have one that's for elementary kids, and then one for like junior high and one for high school. And so I have all those for my kids, but I still can't get them to, I can get them to read like the little cardboard books, but I can't get them to read the other ones yet. So I had them watch stuff with me. And every time I forget that there's a scene that is in Mansfield Park that I like, oh gosh, no, wait, get out of the room. Because I just forget it's there. So
is it one with Fanny?
No, Fanny walks in on someone who is doing something in a not okay. and so I'll give you the synopsis of it. Yeah, go ahead.
So, well, and that's what you're talking about. Isn't all that dissimilar to when Charlotte in the first scene looks over in the field and sees
Edward and
Clara
Clara.
and Edward. Yeah,
Mhm.
which
Yeah.
actually is written out in her first 12 chapters,
Yep.
which
Hmm.
surprised me that it was in there.
I was
So we
too.
can't blame that one on
Nope.
the writers of Sanditon, yeah,
Hmm.
Andrew Davies. We can't blame him for that.
Nope.
It's in the novel.
And it kind of makes you wonder what Jane Austen had come upon in her lifetime where she's seen something like that play out.
Well, I'm not entirely sure that, because in the book it doesn't describe it in the way we absolutely see it in the film.
Hmm. You're
But
right.
you know, she probably wouldn't have described it as in the kind of detail
Hmm.
that we kind of really intimate from the film. But
Yeah.
nonetheless, she wasn't completely naive.
No,
Jane,
she wasn't at
Jane
all.
Austen.
She knew more than, but it's, she has brothers and she's in country
Yeah,
life where she's probably, I mean, this might have happened in like a London ballroom when they went off into another room, but in the country, I imagine this stuff happened more out in the countryside than it would be within the house. I mean, occasionally I'm sure they were in the house, but I imagine that in the country, when you'd had those big country parties, they would find a way to slip away to, or find a place to slip away
right,
to rather
right.
than a house where
And
everybody
her
was.
her Charlotte, the character Charlotte's take on that scene is they must have really wanted some privacy, and this
Hmm.
is where they found to do it.
Yeah.
So it's anyway, it's interesting.
Yeah.
She doesn't, I mean, she doesn't always go by all the standards of,
Mm-mm.
a man and woman can never be together alone. You know,
Mm-mm. I
she
mean, yeah,
does know,
even in Pride and Prejudice, like Darcy and Elizabeth were alone at some points.
right?
And Charles and oh my gosh, Jane. Her name is Jane. I forgot Jane. Charles and Jane were even alone on some occasions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's
Yeah,
because Jane Austen herself knew that she was capable, because the basic ideology for a lot of writers at the time and a lot of men at that time, at least from my understanding, and again, I'm not an expert, but it seems to me that there was this conception that if a woman was alone with a man, that's it. That it's not possible. The woman is going to be stripped of her innocence. The woman is going to be violated. This is just the way it is. The woman just can't say no. The woman can't make it not happen. But I think Jane Austen herself was a woman who understood, I can be alone with a guy and keep my things together. I can be alone
right.
with somebody and not lose my mind. And I think she wrote
Mm-hmm.
women that way because that's who she was. I don't think she was ever in a compromising position necessarily. Not that I can remember anyway. And I've read a lot of, or I've watched a lot of documentaries and read a lot of books about her. And I don't remember seeing anywhere where she was put in a compromising position. But I think that she was oftentimes alone and okay.
Yeah. The it did talk about the fact that that one man that she fell in love with that got shipped off to London
Mm-hmm.
because he needed to marry a fortune, that she was like too obvious in her affection. They
Mm-hmm.
were too obvious in their affection for each other. I and spent all this time together, and so it was a scandal. Her behavior was a scandal.
Yeah.
Jane Austen's.
But I think she did that in public too. I don't think that was just in
Yeah, that
private.
was in public. No, it wasn't
Yeah.
private. No, that's right. You're right.
And
It
so
wasn't behind closed doors.
the synopsis for Mansfield Park is that everybody spends, I love how this person writes it out. Everybody spends the first 300 pages having preconceived notions about everyone else. And that's actually one of my favorite parts about Mansfield Park is I like how watching everybody gets everybody so wrong. But then it's falling in love with all the wrong people. And then suddenly 3 scandals happen at once, resulting in happy endings for all except those whose principles conflict with those of the morally upright protagonist Fanny Price. And that's one of the things in the movie. Fanny Price walks in on someone there's a scandal there. And
Right, right. Yeah,
I feel like if you're
right.
going to do a Jane Austen book, you should make it safe for everybody to watch because Jane Austen is beloved across generations. So if you're going to write it from that Regency time period with her works, not even a readaptation, a remaking of it, but doing her story, you should make it family friendly. It's just, that's just me.
But you can write it in such a way that you see her reaction rather than the event that happens.
Exactly. That's what I think should happen.
Yeah, yeah. The what was I going to say? The thing that parallel I see with Mansfield Park is just the way that the whole Well, Antigua is talked about again. I mean,
Mhm.
I think Antigua in particular, not just the West Indies, but also the whole issue of slavery and I don't remember if it was the cotton or the sugar trade that was addressed, but that whole issue is brought up in Mansfield Park
Yeah.
as it is in Sanditon,
Hmm.
which it isn't in a lot of the books
Hmm.
and films, adaptations.
Yeah. And I feel like in season 2, we can see, I mean, I think Fanny Price, we can see a lot of that in Charlotte, because Fanny Price comes sort of, she's morally upright for sure. She is protagonist for sure. And she is a little bit naive. Well, she's not a little bit, she's a lot
Mm-hmm.
naive when she comes to Sanditon. And I think that's Fanny Price. But I think in season 2, you can even see a little bit of Fanny Price and Georgiana, because Georgiana doesn't
Mm-hmm.
get in any intake, even with, she does get into it a little bit with Lockhart, but I think I'm thinking more of just how she fights for people who need to be fought for. I think from that
Right.
perspective, being more morally upright, that's Georgiana. I think she does fight for people who can't fight for themselves. And that's why she pushes so hard for that sugar trade, is because those people, they don't have the ability to fight for themselves. They don't have the ability to speak to people on a stage that Georgiana does. And so she does that because she's morally obligated to do so. So I think they put a little bit of
Right.
that into Georgiana.
Yo, I think you're right. I do. We need to revisit this issue after the third season comes out,
Mm-hmm.
because I think, especially, how long it takes for things to sort of wrap up and the love interest to
Yeah.
really grow in Mansfield Park. I think we're going to see some of that in season 3.
Yep. I agree. And I think I can even see, I don't remember the name of the guy I remember all the females, but I don't remember the men so much. I don't know what that says about me, but I don't remember the guy that Fanny Price ends up being with. But it's isn't her love interest. It's someone who wants to be with her in the beginning, but she doesn't want to be with him. And then she comes around to be with him.
I'm thinking it was one that, there was a societal difference more than
Because he was like a
whether.
pastor or something, wasn't he?
Oh, I don't remember that.
Or something like that.
What
He didn't have
is
a lot of
it?
money, I don't think. I don't remember. I can picture in my head exactly what I picture him to look
I
like.
thought he was one of the main family.
That's who she fell in love with, I think. The Crawfords. Yeah, I think that's who she fell in love with. But I think that he didn't.
I'd have to reread it or look it up. I don't
Edmund.
remember
She
exactly.
ends up with Edmund.
Oh, Edmund. Okay.
Finally comes to his senses and marries Fanny, and Susan takes her place with the Bertrams. Edmund, Fanny, and the rest of those at Mansfield live happily while Henry, Mary, and Maria are cast out. Henry was the one she walked in on doing something not okay with somebody else.
Okay. Yeah. You're right. You're right. And she was kind of really interested in him until that happened.
Yes. And Edmund, I
Right.
think.
Yeah. It's Edmund Bertram, and
Yes.
he is the second son of Sir Thomas and Lady Bertram.
Yeah. So
and
he
is
was
thus destined for the
son.
church. You're right.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Good. So I might leave all that in there. So yeah, because the way I picture him is wearing I don't think he actually became full, but you know how rectors usually they're depicted as in the black cloak with like the white necktie. And that's how I picture him in my head, is wearing all black except for like the white neckties. I don't know why, but that's how he is in my head.
They had known each other since they were children.
Yes.
And they met when he was 16 and she was 10, and they were cousins.
And he wanted to marry her long before she wanted to marry him.
Right. She didn't see him, in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And then she finally comes around.
Yeah.
Yeah,
because she wants to marry one of the Crawford guys, and then she finds out that that's not just because they're high society doesn't mean they're high morality.
Right. Yeah.
And I think
the father, the Crawford father is become, I believe he's her legal guardian at one point.
Yep.
And he's trying to look out for her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think we can kind of see that now, not in its entirety. There's elements of this story that are put into Sanditon. And I think where I see that is Babington, Edward, and Esther. Obviously, Babington is not a poor second son. He's not. But Esther is in love with Edward, who is a nefarious character who has zero morality, especially after season 2, like no redeeming parts about him at all. And Babington, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Babington
she falls in love with Babington finally. Yeah.
But yeah, he's pursuing her. And he's a good man who wants to be with her. And she says no. You're not who I want.
Right.
I want this one. And then she finds out just how depraved the one that she's interested in and how much what she thought was real was a lie. And she gives in to marry the one who is actually decent and good the whole time. So I think you can kind of see
And that's
that
actually
there.
similar to Emma
Mhm.
and, you know, and her friend that
Yeah.
sort of makes her see how poorly she's behaving. And
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mhm.
And I think
Yeah.
too here with Mansfield Park, everyone falling in love with the wrong people. I think that can be seen in a lot of different ways, especially with like Georgiana, who believes Otis to be one thing and he's not. She believes Charles Lockhart to be one thing and he's not. And it's
Yeah,
these,
and there's
go ahead.
and Colonel Lennox as well, I'm
Mhm.
thinking.
Yes, there are these jump impressions that are taken as fact, which is another Jane Austen thing. And you see that across the board in Sanditon, where the initial impression is, oh, that's fact, that's accurate, that's real. And they have to relearn. They have to see, oh, wait, these people that I've given my heart to are not right at all. And I think even with James Stringer a little bit, where he falls for Charlotte, although he's right in his perception, I think that's probably a bit of a stretch, but she's not right for him. But he
Right.
sees her and he wants her because of who she is, but she wouldn't be right for him at all. And I think we can see that with Sydney and Eliza a little bit, where Eliza just wants him. It's just, and that's more from a standpoint of falling in love with the wrong people. I'm not, that's the only point I'm
Right.
drawing there, is a lot of them fall in love with the wrong people.
Yes. Well, and Allison with
Right. With Carter.
Carter. Yeah.
Mhm.
Mhm. Yeah. Same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Happens a lot in these stories.
It does. So I think, do you have any other things you want to draw to her? Because we went through all 7 of her novels. Is there any other line you want to draw between any of them?
No, I think we've pretty well covered it until, like I said, let's wait till season 3 comes out,
Yes.
and then we may have some additional things to say about this.
Yes, because the storylines we have now, we're comparing them to complete finished works where we know the end, and we don't know the end. I mean, we think we know the end of Sanditon because we know what we want in Sanditon, but that didn't play out so well the last time. So we don't know how Sanditon's going to end yet. So I think we will revisit this once we have a full season 3 out, and it'll be one of our topics that we discuss. So we want to know what you think too. What parallels did you see? Do you agree with all of ours, or do you think, wow, you guys are stretching it quite a bit and that's not accurate? Let us know what you think. And again, remember, go back and watch our Paula Byrne interview that we did last year, or that I did last year, and hear all the things. It was a really, really insightful interview, and I would love to have her back on the show. But she's an Austen expert, and the way she talks about her is like she knew her personally. And it was a really fun interview to do. She had a lot of really good information and a lot of good insight into who she was all through her life, but especially who she was when she was writing Sanditon. So go back and check out that interview we have on YouTube and on our podcast platforms. Check that out. It was our season 1. It's like within the first 50 episodes or so.
And Paula Byrne was a consultant on both seasons. Well, 3 seasons really.
Yep. The literary consultant. Yep. And I think I think she was given the scripts, so she knew them a little bit ahead of time, so she could say, nope, this wouldn't happen. And there are some things that she fought for that were like, no, leave this in here because this would be good, or take this out because that wouldn't have fit. That was how she interacted with them on the script, was keeping it Jane Austen-esque.
The men's nude bathing, she definitely defended that because it was true.
Exactly. I mean, would Jane Austen have written about that? Maybe not the way we saw it, but I think she was aware that that's how it worked. That's how it happened. So
yeah. I mean, that's what was common. And the other thing that I was going to say about Paula is that she has said already that she liked season 3 the best. So I'm looking forward to it.
Me too. I can't wait to see it. So check out to keep you occupied, check out our next schedule. So next week, I think we're going to be pulling up a fan fiction episode. So if we need it by tomorrow, by tonight, Billy, because you are here. We're recording this a day early. So tomorrow this will come out, but get us your fan fiction by the end of today. So we have a week to read it before we record, and we'll get into that. Otherwise, we're just going to go to our Facebook group, which, by the way, is the Sanditon Chronicles Sanditon Family Fan Club on Facebook. I'll bump the post today, but we have on there where you can list your fan fiction. So if we don't get any recommendations from you, you want us to review your fan fiction, critique it on air. If we don't get that from you, we will just go to our page under our fan fiction post and pull up one of the fan fictions there and read that and dissect it on our next podcast. Now, things are going to change a little bit. We've talked a lot about what we can for Sanditon 1 and 2. I'm working on getting us interviews, so hopefully those will be coming up. But otherwise, all we really have left at the moment is fan fiction. So if you want us to discuss something else, or if you want to come on and discuss with us something, please let us know by checking on our email. And that's at the bottom of all of our descriptions on YouTube, on our podcast. We have all of our socials there. Our email is listed there. Check those out. Connect with us. We want to know what you want to hear coming up, because now all we have planned is interviews or fan fiction, and then interviews if we can get them until season 3 comes out. And we want to keep giving you content. So let us know what you want to hear. And on that note, we will see you in a week. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Are you craving more TSC content? Head on over to our social media accounts. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and our Facebook group, the Sanditon Chronicles Sanditon Family Fan Club. Also, check out our website, thesanditonchronicles.com. Of course, we want to hear from you. We want to know what you want to hear and what your thoughts are. Email us at the.sanditonchronicles@gmail.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Tune in every week for new episodes.